everyone, it's Miranda. Happy New Year. I hope you all had a restful break so far. Before we get into today's video, which is a review of some of the questions from the last practice test you took, Test A from the 2019-2020 handbook, we want to take a moment to thank you for sticking with us. We know this program has run a lot longer than expected and it takes tremendous dedication to stick with it, especially given what's been going on in the world around us. Regardless of how you do on the test, we will be super proud of your effort. Okay, now back to the regular program. We're going to go over some grammar questions today. This is our last grammar video of the year, so we really suggest that you pay attention and watch the videos we link in the description if you need more grammar review. We're going to review some of the more difficult grammar concepts before we get into the actual questions. I'm going to go over each concept in the most concise, which means short and straightforward, way possible. But we'll also link some of our videos that go over them in more detail below. To start off, we have comma rules. There are 5 comma rules that you need to know for the SHSAT. The first is lists, then we have introductory phrases, non-essential information, before a conjunction that combines 2 sentences, and between 2 elements in a place. Take a moment to look at the examples we put on the PowerPoint and write down any that might have slipped your mind. If you want to memorize them just for the sake of it, a fun tip is trying to make a word or phrase out of the first letter of each rule. If you can work with these, then that might help you out. Now we're going to go over 2 types of phrases, prepositional and modifying. The names can sound intimidating, but it's actually more important that you understand what they are and how they work. Modifying phrases are phrases that modify another part of the sentence. This could mean a lot of things, but the most important thing you need to know is that they should be as close to the word they are modifying as possible. To remember this, think about adjectives and adverbs, which are types of modifiers. If you were to put the adjective blue to the sentence the dog ran, you'd put it next to the dog because that's what it's modifying, and that makes the most sense. The same thing applies to modifying phrases which are longer and consist of a few words, like this one that modified the verb ran. Also, keep in mind the modifiers don't need to be set off by commas unless they're in the beginning of a sentence because they're introductory phrases at that point. Now we're going to go over a special type of modifying phrase called a prepositional phrase. A prepositional phrase is a modifying phrase that is made of a preposition and an object. A preposition, which we've gone over briefly in the past, is a word that can explain the relationship between nouns in a sentence. For example, the preposition in can tell you what something is in. You can usually recognize a prepositional phrase because they're short and they add some information about the sentence without being part of the main subject-verb structure or being separated by commas. They're prepositional phrases, so they follow the same rules we just mentioned. Last but not least, we're going to go over tenses. Verb tenses, as you know, tell you when the verb happened. The past tense of run, for example, is ran. The main rule you need to remember with tenses is consistency. You need to make sure that every verb in the sentence makes sense. It's like the subject-verb agreement, but it's about time instead of quantity. Remember that making sure the tenses are correct is not the same as making sure that the tenses are the same. One sentence can use multiple tenses as long as there are prepositions clarifying that the verbs happened at different times. Pause the video here and try to make the corrections for these sentences' verb tenses. When you're done, compare what you did to the correct revisions right here. Alright, that's all the grammar we have today. Now we're going to go over some of the harder questions from the grammar section of the last practice test. Since this is our last video on grammar, we really suggest that you pay close attention to these revisions if the section is hard for you. And don't hesitate to email if you have another grammar question that we didn't go over. Okay, the first question we're doing today is question 1 from page 56 of the practice test linked below. The question is asking us how the paragraph should be revised. Let's read the paragraph and then go over the choices. While doing this, I want you to remember the grammar tips we just went over. Option A says to change spent to had spent, and insert a comma after play in sentence 1. Looking at the rest of the paragraph, I can see that it's written in the past tense. I know this because the paragraph uses words like did and recited. This means that the word spent is actually correct and shouldn't be changed. Adding a comma after the word play is also unnecessary. Thinking back to our earlier grammar tips, we know that the prepositional phrases do not need commas separating them from the rest of the sentence. However, adding a comma after play would do just that. Quote, at the community theater is a prepositional phrase. This means that both of the revisions in option A are wrong, so we can rule it out. Option B tells us to change did to does, and insert a comma after projection in sentence 2. The word did is correct because the entire paragraph is written in past tense, so we don't need to change that. So is actually part of the phrase so that. As a phrase, so that does not require a comma, so we can rule this answer choice out. If you think back to our comma rules, you can remember that non-essential information is often separated by commas. There are a lot of ways to test this, but what I usually do is put my finger over the information and see if the sentence still makes sense without it. It's also helpful to remember that if you're not sure if the phrase belongs there, try substituting the word that into it, and if it makes sense, then it's essential information. Don't separate any clauses or phrases that the word that can be a part of. Option C asks us to change studies to studied and delete the comma after emotions in sentence 3. We just established that the whole paragraph is in past tense, so changing the word studies from present tense to the past tense studies is a correction that should be made. Next, taking the comma out of after the word emotions works because the word emotions and motivations are a group of two. Thinking back to our grammar review, you should remember that when there are only two elements in a series, a comma isn't necessary. This means that both of the revisions in option C are good to go. Let's look over option D before selecting it though. Option D is telling us to change recited to recites and delete the comma after times in sentence 4. The word recited is in the past tense, so no need to change that. The comma after times is used to separate the phrase, quote, making slight adjustments and improvements to his performance each time, from the main clause. This is important, so we shouldn't be removing it. Option D looks incorrect, so let's go ahead and circle option C as the correct answer. The next question we'll be reviewing is question 3 on the next page. The question asks, which sentence contains an error in its construction and should be revised? Okay, let's look at each of the 4 sentences and figure out which one is grammatically incorrect. Sentence 1 says, in 1976, the National Basketball Association absorbed several teams of the American Basketball Association, including the New York Nets, who played in the Long Island area at the time. From reading that aloud, the structure seems correct. The modifying phrase, who played in the Long Island area at the time, correctly modifies the noun, New York Nets. So let's rule this one out. Sentence 2 says, the owner of the Nets decided to take the team to New Jersey after the team had financial troubles, where the Nets played for 35 seasons. Okay, as I read this, I notice that the placement of the phrase, quote, where the Nets played for 35 seasons, suggests the phrase is talking about the team's financial troubles, which doesn't really make any sense. The phrase should follow the location, New Jersey. I would revise this sentence to say, quote, after the team had financial troubles, the owner of the Nets decided to take the team to New Jersey, where the Jets played for 35 seasons. Because the sentence definitely has a construction error, I think it's the answer, but I'm still going to skim over the other ones to double check. Sentence 3 says, the New Jersey Nets had 16 playoff appearances, including 2 appearances in the NBA Finals. I didn't notice any error in the structure of that sentence. It sounded natural as I read it aloud. Compared to the obvious error in sentence 2, I'm going to say this isn't the answer. Finally, we have sentence 4, which says, then in 2012, after a change in ownership, the team returned to New York and began playing under the name the Brooklyn Nets. This sentence also doesn't have any errors in structure. Let's circle sentence 2, because that was the only one that really needs to be revised. Alright, that was it for grammar. We spent a lot of time overall on the different rules you need to know, but we're also going to put a few of our grammar videos in the description. We're going to put a few of the links to worksheets and articles by other people that go over the grammar concepts we went over today. And as always, don't hesitate to email us if you want some more information. Stay safe, happy, and healthy, and we'll see you next week.